The frontier did not end with a gunshot. No last standoff, no final duel on a dusty street, no dramatic moment that the mythology could build an ending around the way it had built everything else. Clean, compressed, cinematically satisfying, it ended with a sentence. A single sentence written by a government statistician named Robert Porter in the United States Census Bureau's report of 1890. The sentence stated that the unsettled area of the United States had been so broken into by isolated bodies of settlement that it could no longer be said that a frontier line existed. That was it. The frontier, the specific geographical, legally defined boundary between settled American territory and unsettled American territory that the Census Bureau had been tracking and reporting since 1790, was gone, not conquered, not won, not concluded by any dramatic event that the popular imagination could fix on as the moment, simply measured, counted, and declared in the flat administrative language of a government report to no longer exist. The Wild West did not end. It was counted out of existence. The 1890 census documented something that the people living inside the frontier era had been watching happen for 20 years, without a vocabulary adequate to describe it. The open range was closing, not in one place, not in one season, but across the entire western landscape simultaneously. The specific, relentless, economically driven process of barbed wire and homestead claims and railroad expansion, converting open country into divided, deeded, legally bounded private land that the frontier's defining characteristic, the ability to move freely across unenclosed territory, could not survive. The cattle drives were already over. The last significant drive up the Chisholm Trail had run in 1884. The Great Die-Up of 1886 to 1887, the catastrophic winter that killed between 50 and 90% of the cattle on the northern plains and destroyed the open-range cattle industry in a single season, had accomplished in 4 months what a decade of homesteading pressure had been building toward. The open-range economy that the cattle drive era had built collapsed under the specific, combined weight of overgrazing, barbed wire, and a winter that the mythology's version of the frontier had not prepared anyone for. The buffalo were gone. 30 million animals in 1870, fewer than 1,000 in 1889. The industrial slaughter that Sheridan had endorsed as Indian policy and the hide market had financed had accomplished in 2 decades what no natural process had managed in 10,000 years of the animal's presence on the continent. The Indian Wars were ending. Wounded Knee Creek on December 29, 1890, 3 weeks after the census report declared the frontier closed, produced the deaths of between 250 and 300 Lakota men, women, and children in the snow of a South Dakota winter. It was the last significant military engagement of the Indian Wars. The resistance that the frontier had required the Army to combat for 25 years was over. The frontier had not been won. It had been consumed. Frederick Jackson Turner read the census report and understood its implication before almost anyone else in American public life did. He presented his paper, The Significance of the Frontier in American History, at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in July of 1893. His argument was simple, and its cultural impact was enormous. The frontier, Turner said, had been the engine of American democratic character, the place where the European institutions that immigrants brought with them were stripped away by the demands of the wilderness and replaced with something distinctly American. Individualism, practical intelligence, the specific democratic instinct of men who had no one to depend on but themselves, and who had therefore developed the self-reliance that democratic citizenship required. The frontier was closed. The engine was gone. What Turner did not say, what the mythology that followed him consistently declined to say, was what else had been consumed in the production of that democratic character, the peoples whose land the frontier had crossed, the cultures whose material foundations the frontier had systematically destroyed. The specific human cost of the democratic engine's operation, paid by people who had not agreed to pay it and who received nothing from the transaction except its consequences. The men who had been the frontier's human expression did not disappear when the Census Bureau declared the frontier line gone. They aged, they adapted, or they did not adapt, and they became what the mythology was already constructing. The last representatives of a vanished world, the living artifacts of something the nation was converting, even as they breathed, from lived experience into legend. Wyatt Earp lived until 1929. He died in Los Angeles, in a house, in bed. He spent his final years advising the early Hollywood film industry on how the frontier had actually been, and watching the industry convert what he told them into something considerably more satisfying than the actual account. Geronimo died in 1909, in captivity, at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where he had been held as a prisoner of war for 23 years following his 1886 surrender. He was allowed to ride in Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade in 1905. The specific, grotesque irony of a man who had spent 23 years imprisoned being displayed as a trophy of the civilization that had imprisoned him in a celebration of that civilization's democratic vitality. The last cattle drive, the last gunfight, the last Indian War. These endings did not arrive together on a single date. They arrived across a decade of the 1880s and 1890s in the specific, gradual, overlapping way that actual historical periods end, not with a clean break, but with an accumulation of last times that nobody recognized as last times when they were occurring. The frontier ended in the way that all things end, when they are too large and too embedded in daily life to end dramatically. It was replaced by fences, by railroads, by the specific, permanent, legally defined private property that the Homestead Act and the barbed wire and the survey stakes had been constructing across the open range for 30 years. The mythology arrived to fill the space the frontier left. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was already touring when the census declared the frontier closed, already converting the recent past into entertainment, already building the image of the frontier that the country needed now that the frontier was gone. The Wild West did not end. It became a show. And the show, the specific, constructed, deliberately simplified, romantically amplified version of what the frontier had actually been, proved more durable than the thing it replaced. The frontier lasted 30 years. The mythology has lasted 150. And it is still running.